afraid to love you. I am not afraid.
That will be a great discussion. A few housekeeping details. This session is being recorded and it will be made available as part of your symposium proceedings. There will be Q&A at the end of the panel discussion. The panel discussion will include both strategic and tactical components behind driving a data-driven culture. With that, I would like to welcome our moderator, Robin Rappaport, and she will introduce herself and the panelists and drive the discussion. Robin?
Lakshmi, thank you. I'm mic'd. Thank you so much, Lakshmi. Okay, so actually, she already said the welcome to the session, but I wanted to specifically welcome everyone to our session 10A, how Treasury Department leverages implementation of the Evidence Act and the federal data strategy to hone data leadership practices and build a data-driven culture. This fireside chat with data leadership from the United States Department of Treasury includes Roger Michaud, Chief Data Officer, Department of Treasury. Welcome, Roger.
Thank you.
Justin Marseco, who is Chief Data Officer, Bureau of the Fiscal Service. Welcome, Justin.
Thanks, Robin.
From the Internal Revenue Service, we have Dr. Melanie Krause, Chief Data and Analytics Officer. Welcome, Melanie. Dr. Reza Rashidi, Director, Data Management Division, DMD, Research Applied Analytics and Statistics, RAS, and Chair, Data Analytics and Analytics Data Council. Welcome, Reza.
Thanks, Robin.
I, Robin Rappaport, have over 35 years as a data quality practitioner. I am an operations research analyst with a deep interest in data and metadata quality. Prior to graduate school, I worked as a computer programmer and systems analyst. As technical project manager, I run the IRS Data and Analytics Data Council. I lead related subgroups and the Data and Analytics Community of Practice, COP for IRS and Treasury-wide. Recognized as a Superior Contributor awardee in the Federal CDO Council Data Inventory Working Group, I also lead the Treasury Data Inventory Working Group. In support of the IRA initiative to maximize data utility at the IRS, I manage data governance, including metadata standards and data standards, data catalog, lineage, taxonomy, and sensitivity. The first question that I present to each of you will provide you the opportunity to talk about yourself as a professional. We will start this first round of questions with Roger, followed by Melanie, then Reza, and then Justin. Roger, as a relatively new CDO and new Chief Senior Executive, I am curious about your perspective on the strategic use of data. Roger, please share a little about your background and your focus at Treasury as the department's first Treasury-wide CDO.
Well, thanks, Robin, and good morning to each of you, and thanks for having us. And again, to my esteemed colleagues that I get an opportunity to work with every day, thank you all for giving me an opportunity, I guess, to chat a little bit. Just a little bit about my background. Former Marine officer. While I was in the Marines, I was formally trained as an operations research analyst, and I spent about 15 years applying OR techniques and applications towards Marine Corps logistics problems. After that time, I think picked up a role as a chief analytics officer, I guess, if you will, in a little bit of a Marine Corps context within an installation down in Albany, Georgia, if you're familiar with that. After that, in 2015, I made it into Treasury, where I had an opportunity to work within our OCIO, leading a lot of our data management programs, specifically on the technical data management capability side. And then in December 2021, I was selected as the department's first Treasury-wide CDO. So I think when I think about your question, Robin, and a little bit of my background and then the strategic use of data, I think a lot about, in my career in total, I've always been really curious about how things work. And even if I didn't realize it then, it was more about how can we use data to really improve how things work. Because if you look at, the whole definition of operations research, you almost call it like the science of better. So how are we improving things? And as CDO at Treasury, it's a real honor to be able to kind of think about data from a holistic perspective and in the context of the Evidence Act. And with that, there are several, I think, focus areas that I have. And what I'll say is I kind of walk through these. Not all of these areas are things that we're actively doing working in, at least at the headquarters level, but certainly there's a lot of work that's taking place at our agency and bureau level. The first one is in our data infrastructure. So we were looking really deeply at, do we have the tools, do we have the technology, the people, the skills, the guidance, do we have the standards and the policy in order to be able to increase our capacity to use and to manage data. The second area I would say is in the data education space. Are we building a data literate workforce that's able to tackle those challenges of today and of tomorrow? And as an example, can we leverage our current construct for data education and think about how we would build and enable an AI skilled workforce, if you will? The third area that we're really focused in on is in data sharing, right? So making certain that we can put our hands around our data, that we know where those silos are and where we don't, engage to kind of share our data more broadly across our enterprise, as long as it's not protected from disclosure or other issues such as that. The fourth area I would say is in data governance, and that governance word is a kind of a bad word sometimes, depending on where you go and how you talk about it. So I'm very careful not to use it very often, to be honest. But it's really about, in my mind, is do we have our hands around our entire data ecosystem, right? Do we know where our data lives? Do we know how it's being used to support our mission? And do we have good processes and procedures in place to mature it so that we could improve the quality of our decision making? And then the final area is in the analytics, right? You never can get away with not thinking about how we look at that raw data and information and turn it into something that's useful intelligence. And then storytell. Use that data to storytell so we can articulate our position, articulate our policies and our direction in terms of accomplishing our mission. So thanks.
Thank you, Roger. Melanie, you are a relatively new addition to the IRS. Please tell us about your career journey and what, if anything, has surprised you regarding the use of data at the service.
Sure. So I joined the IRS in October of 2021 as the inaugural Chief Data and Analytics Officer. Before joining IRS, I spent about 12 years in the federal oversight community. So 5 years at the Government Accountability Office and then 7 years at the VA Office of Inspector General. As an inaugural CDAO, it's been really very fun to work with my team and across the enterprise to build out the role. And so there's two pieces. There's the Chief Data Officer responsibilities. This responsibility is really intertwined with roles and responsibilities of the IRS CIO. So the CIO oversees the systems that are responsible for actually getting most of the data that we have at the IRS. So the actual receipt and then processing of tax returns of other forms. And so we work closely together. There are some parts of the data officer role that are more uniquely mine. So thinking about across the enterprise, what data do we need? What do we currently not have to be able to do our work? And then how can we work together to fill those gaps? And so that's more uniquely in my portfolio. Then the other piece is the Chief Analytics Officer role, which is really the very fun part because it's putting data to work. And so I work with my stakeholders across the enterprise to think about how we can address questions of strategic importance to the service. So the age-old question of how do we differentiate efficiently and accurately compliant taxpayers from non-compliant taxpayers so that we're focusing our enforcement resources on individuals who are likely to be non-compliant and leaving honest taxpayers alone. What are the ways to look at the return on investment for IRS? So traditionally we've looked pretty narrowly at
if we have audits, how much money is determined to be owed to the Treasury. How do we think about the importance of service in that context? So as we help taxpayers to get it right, how do we evaluate that? How do we estimate the effectiveness of those types of programs? So those are some of the things that we work on in the analytics side of my portfolio. That's a very well-established portfolio. I inherited a really fantastic team that has been doing this work for a long time, and so it's been a real pleasure, as we're building out the role of the Chief Data Officer, to be able to work with a really, really high-quality team that focuses already on analytics. So things that surprised me, I was actually really surprised at how data-focused the leadership team already is. So I think that's in part a function that people are understandably, concerned about decisions that IRS makes. It impacts them as individuals. And so as a leadership team, there's a key focus on data. Have we considered the facts? Have we evaluated options closely? Why are we picking the path that we did? And so based on just that culture and environment, the leadership team is really very focused on the data that we have and why we're doing what we're doing. The other thing that surprised me, which I know is probably important to many people in this room, is the number of women in really senior positions. So there's me, female Chief Data Analytics Officer, Chief of Staff, the head of small business, self-employed, the Chief Financial Officer, all women in very important leadership positions within the organization. That has been really exciting.
Melanie, thank you. Reza, considering your role and background supporting research and analytics, please tell us a little about yourself and more about your perspective on data and analytics at the IRS.
Sure. Thanks, Robin. So thanks, everyone, for being here again. So I'm going to add one title to Melanie that she didn't mention. In addition to being the Chief Data Analytics Officer, she's the Director of Research, Applied Analytics, and Statistics at IRS, which is an organization that's been at IRS for quite some time, focused on doing research and data analytics. And my background is computer science and mathematics, and I work in this organization. My primary responsibility is to essentially prepare or maintain or manage the data and analytic capabilities that's needed that supports research and analytics by research community at IRS, which a big part of that is what's under Melanie, but also there are embedded research organizations across the entire IRS that do research. And I would also reflect on another comment that Melanie made in terms of the senior leadership's recognition of the value of data and focus on data, and that is, I believe this organization, this Research Applied Analytics and Statistics, because has been doing analytics and has been demonstrating the value of analytics and the use of analytics for as many years as it has. Statistics of income was actually legislatively mandated by, I believe, it's 104 years old, so a long time ago. So that type of work has been done at IRS for quite some time, and I think that has had an impact on the leadership's recognition of the value that data analytics can bring to solving big problems. One of the major ones is called tax gap. So if you, a lot of analytics that's been used to that. If you Google that, you'll find that basically there are more than $500 billion gap between the amount of tax that annually that we estimate are owed to the federal government versus what was collected, and some of the challenges that comes from that in that regard. So that's and so my focus has been providing capabilities for this community, and since Melanie started as the Chief Data Analytics Officer, also been supporting her on basically the enterprise-wide data and analytics related initiatives.
Reza, thank you. I'd actually like to add If anyone is familiar with Tom Davenport's early book on competing on analytics, there is, I used to have the page number memorized, but there is a reference to the IRS as the first non-defense application of analytics, which means we've been doing it for a long time. And I know I've been doing it since 1990 there. So when we just were a research division, and now we're a research applied analytics and statistics, so we've grown a lot. Okay, Justin, your turn. Tell us a little about your background. What have you learned about how to be a successful data practitioner in the federal government and specifically at the Bureau of the Fiscal Service?
Hi, thanks, Robin. I'm Justin. I work for the Fiscal Service, the CDO. I just will say real quickly what the Fiscal Service is, because probably most of you haven't heard of it. So Fiscal Service is the part of the Treasury which helps to operate the finances of the federal government. So we make payments on behalf of federal agencies. We collect revenue that's due to the government, whether assessed by IRS or if you're going into a park and paying a fee that way. We account for all federal resources across the government so that we know what the debt is, what the deficit is every day. We also sell Treasury securities. If you've heard of an I-bond, you can go to treasurydirect.gov. That's something that we run. We also sell securities to institutional investors to help continue to finance the government. So one of the roles that I have is trying to oversee all those data flows into the Fiscal Service and try to make them better for ourselves and for the public. My background is in economics. I also, like Roger and Melanie, have a couple things in common. I'm the first Chief Data Officer that was appointed at the Fiscal Service, which means that largely what I'm trying to do is figure out what I am supposed to do with like a lot of fits and starts. I would say that like I definitely have gone in some directions that I've tried to self-correct and have learned about what's been successful and what hasn't been successful. I can get into that a little bit later. The other thing is I also worked in the oversight community, which for us is like the kind of internal audit function, an investigative function that the federal government has to look into itself. And one insight I wanted to share that I remember, I worked at the Commerce Department's Office of Inspector General as a senior advisor for 5 or 6 years. And one thing that I remember realizing is that we have this very broad authority in the oversight community to basically have access to every piece of paper, every piece of data that exists within our department. The law is super clear on that. But the way in which we did our investigative work is that we had a hotline, and people would call the hotline and they would say, hey, I see a problem with this contract. I see a problem with this grant. I see a problem with this manager. And then we would respond to those hotline complaints. And while I was sitting there watching that and thinking about the unfathomable amount of data that we have in the department, and that was the way that we followed leads. So what I tried to do there, but what I also realized is that making that change is really difficult because we may be sitting on top of a huge amount of data that's describing all different types of activities, but that data largely may not be defined. It may be completely inaccessible, and you also need to have somebody who is creative enough to think of the right use cases to start treading the path towards uncovering the data, seeing what the issues are, and then making it more defined, making it more accessible. So anyway, thanks for having me here. I'm excited to talk to you guys.
Thank you, Justin. Okay, now we will move on to an opportunity for each of you to highlight significant initiatives that you are or plan to be involved with. The order for this round will be Justin, followed by Roger, then Melanie, and then Reza. Justin, a key role of the Fiscal Service is making financial data available to the public through usaspending.gov and fiscaldatatreasury.gov. Please tell us about how you have worked to improve the experience of public data consumers who need information about the finances of the federal government and what you have learned.
Okay, thank you. Yes, so I want to do my mandatory advertisement here. We have 2 websites that we provide data. You can access all of it. usaspending.gov contains data on every federal contract, every federal grant by any federal agency across the government in a standardized format, all downloadable at your fingertips. We are one of the only countries in the world that provides this level of transparency to our public and to our taxpayers. So I hope that you check that out if you haven't seen it before and that you're proud of that. We also have a website called fiscaldata.treasury.gov where we disclose information that's more detailed on things like the amount of gold that's stored in Fort Knox, the debt number, the national debt numbers that are updated on a daily basis. And one point that I wanted to make to all of you is, like, we often talk in the data community about the importance of doing data work to find efficiencies, to like make our operations more effective, more efficient, to save revenue, to deliver better value for customers. But one other important function, at least in the government, of data is transparency to build public trust. And that is a connection that I think is really important. It motivates a lot of the work that we do. And if you think about all of American businesses, they pay revenue to support the federal government, and it's incumbent on us to describe what happened to those resources. And one thing that's been inspiring for me is realizing that this concept is actually embedded in the Constitution. If you look in the Constitution, the word treasury only appears 3 times, but one of those is a time that commands the government to publish receipts and expenditures from time to time of all public money. And to me, that is included there because it recognizes that it's not just taxation without representation that is unfair. It is taxation without public accountability that produces an unstable system. So that concept is firmly baked into everything that we do. The last thing I want to say is that what we've tried to learn, or what we have learned, is that taking good data and publishing it for the public is not enough in and of itself. We have to take the extra step of making sure that people actually can understand the data and use it. And the way that we've tried to do that is by building products with a human-centered design process that people actually use and understand. One example I'll give of this is a product we built called Your Guide to America's Finances. If you Google that, you'll find we have data that we've been publishing for decades and decades and decades, which is now presented in a visual format with a data storytelling lens, and it's updated every day using APIs. But we have been able to increase the number of people who see this information, basics about federal finance, by over 100 times by taking it out of a PDF and putting it into a format that is discoverable through search engines and fun and interesting to look at.
Justin, thank you. I'm also one of the people that's now learning about the Bureau of the Fiscal Service. Okay. Roger, although data education is not explicitly called out in the Evidence Act, it is certainly implied and is also referenced in the federal data strategy. What is Treasury doing under your leadership in the data education space, and how do you believe that will help accomplish the goals of the Evidence Act and support mission accomplishment?
Thanks, Robin. I'm going to take a quick diversion as I kind of answer that question a little bit. My dad was a pretty wise guy. I grew up on a farm down in South Carolina. And you might hear a little bit of the drawl in there, so don't laugh at me too hard. And we grew some of everything, out there. But we also had a little business, in the next town over. And, it was the crown jewel kind of working with my dad that you wanted to be at the business kind of selling the things that you cropped. And my dad used to tell me all the time, it's like, I know you want to get out there to start selling this stuff. He's like, but you can't sell it if you don't understand how to grow it, right? And so he made us go to the field, right, and plant, grow, learn something about what it is that we were going to sell, and then finally make it out there to sell. Why I bring that story up is because I think a lot about education almost kind of like in the same way, right? If we want to get to a point to be able to use data in a way that is really impactful and that really, kind of drives your organizations to change, you have to know something about how you find it, how you use it, how you store it, and how you do and apply operations on data management side to make sure that the data that you have is in fact usable. You heard Justin say that, and you heard Melanie say that as well. So when I think about data education, and this is probably out of those 5 things that I think I listed earlier, this is probably the number 1 that I'm really focused on right now at Treasury, and that is data education. My vision really there is to build a holistic program that takes the best of the work that I think a lot of our agencies are doing and putting some framework around that and making certain that we've got a holistic program that covers the goals of our enterprise, but that is also very flexible and robust enough to be tailored by those at the agency level. So a couple of things that we've done, we pulsed a couple of our data advisory committees and our data governance board folks, as well as the senior leadership to find out, hey, what do you care about, when it comes to data education? And we took those lessons learned and brought them back. And then we started thinking, okay, so now that we've got an idea of what they really care about, where should we do our initial focus in the training? And one of the things that we learned through surveys and other things is, while foundational kind of data education is certainly important, looking at the now, leadership has a ton of questions about things that are happening every day in budgeting and in the space. And so we decided to focus an initial training effort on advanced training. A very small cohort of folks from Treasury have representatives from all of our bureaus. And we set up a couple of pilots where we are training individuals in the advanced use of data using analytics tools like R, the Pythons, as well as your business intelligence as well. And in doing so, we're starting to learn as we are building our communities of practice at Treasury, we're really putting those to use where we are not only taking people and sending them through training, but we're bringing them back, giving them an opportunity to talk to us about what they learned through their capstone projects. But then here's where I think we have a little bit of a differentiator, at least in terms of what I would like to do. And I acknowledge that it's a little bit difficult. But I'd like to bring those folks back and learn how are you using those skills in your organization to move the needle, right? It's not enough just to come through the training and get the stamp and get that certification and say, oh, I'm trained. But how are you making a real impact using those skills? And do we need to set up some additional opportunities to continue that mentorship, with those individuals as they go through that training? That is something that's really, really important to me because I want them to be able to understand how to sell it. How do you storytell from this data once you learn how to store it and do all these other things? I want you to learn the very basics, but I also want you to go and apply it, right? And so we're thinking about ways to do that, and we've been, kind of moderately successful in bringing, some of those folks back to talk about that. We've partnered with some of the leading digital training platforms out there to get a sense of, how do our staff at Treasury really prefer to learn when it comes to training? What are the tools and the skill sets that they are telling us that we need within that toolkit for them to be successful? And then we've had a roundtable here recently, a few months ago, where the CDOs came together from Treasury, and we started thinking about, how do we really mature, data education and data literacy, within the space at Treasury? Started putting some framework and some ideas behind that. And then finally, we're continuing to kind of move forward, in that, kind of training vein. And as we think about my role as the department CDO, one of the things I try to stress is that we are there. My office exists to enable support, enable success across our department. Right? We're not there as a kind of self-licking ice cream cone, but really to enable everyone else to be successful. And that's where we derive our greatest sense of purpose from doing that. And so we're really excited about continuing that work. We've got a lot of things that we are practicing or we were planning here in the next fiscal year. Our team is growing. As a result of that, we've gotten some very positive feedback from our senior leadership across the department, and really excited about continuing the work going forward.
That's really exciting. Actually, Roger, now I know where to go to get my next and future speakers for the Treasury, what was the IRS Data and Analytics Community of Practice monthly that we have had since 2017. We recently, as a result of your deputy, Daniel Kane, reaching out to me, we are doing that Treasury-wide now on a quarterly basis. So now I know some of these capstone projects might be future speakers for that.
Absolutely.
As well as this panel in September, by the way. Okay. Melanie, the recently released Inflation Reduction Act, IRA, Strategic Operating Plan,
It's a mouthful.
SOP. Okay, says quite a bit about building a data-driven culture. Melanie, tell us a little about some of the data elements in the plan and how this will improve taxpayer service and tax administration broadly.
So as a little bit of context, in the decade leading up to the passage of the Inflation Reduction Act, it had been a pretty difficult fiscal environment for IRS. And as a function of that, we are really behind other parts of the government in terms of IT modernization. And so that is a huge challenge for us in terms of the ability to use data and insights to drive decision making, but it has also really complicated our ability to serve taxpayers well. And so the passage of the IRA, $80 billion is really a tremendous unlock in the ability to improve how we serve. And so it was an unusual appropriations bill in that there were very few strings attached to how we spend the money. And so that was the purpose of the strategic operating plan, to really outline what our plans are in the near and longer term to modernize and to transform. And so if you take a look, for the people who are interested in learning more about IRS, it's a really useful document in seeing where it is that we're trying to head. There's specific data sections, but then because data is so foundational to government operations, you will see it woven throughout. I'm really excited about all the data initiatives, frankly. The one that I'm honestly the most excited about is 4.8, which speaks to how we will partner with others around building evidence, advancing decision making. And so there, we have a pretty long history in IRS of working with people outside of the government to answer questions that are really important to us. So we have the Joint Statistical Research Program. We just had an open call where researchers from other parts of the government, typically outside of the government, will send us proposals. We have a process for selecting them, and then we work together for those that are selected to be able to build out answers and evidence. So in the SOP, we describe a really different approach to supporting evidence building moving forward. So what are the ways that we can leverage technology to really increase the velocity to the type of work and the speed of work that we can pursue? So we're pretty close at this point on a synthetic PUF, a public use file. And so this will make much more data available that is consistent with the patterns in actual tax returns, but does not contain real tax data. So that then researchers outside of the government who have questions about how different types of programs, different types of demographic characteristics impact the financial well-being and health of our population. This is an unlock for them. What are the ways that we can use some of the really advanced privacy-sparing technologies to be able to bring in information and provide back output that, again, protects the identity of taxpayers but allows important questions to be answered. So for local tax administrations, if you're trying to reach out to underserved communities and help them get earned income tax credit, help them to get other credits for which they're entitled, this is a way of looking at, did it work? Should we continue to invest? If it didn't work, to then be able to sort of pivot and think about what we can do moving forward. So for me, that is really exciting because it's bigger than tax administration. It's really supporting our ability to answer really tough questions that are hard to answer without some of the types of information that IRS has.
Melanie, that's wonderful. Also, as a public service announcement, irs.gov, our website, has the whole IRA SOP if anyone's interested in looking and understanding more about 4.8. or 4.5 that I'm working on. Thank you. Okay, Reza, considering what Melanie just spoke about, please give us your perspective about the initiatives you find most interesting.
So the initiative that Melanie talked about is extremely interesting, even from both matter of security and privacy of taxpayer data is very important to us. It's very paramount. It's protected by law. And so availability of that data for this type of research is extremely limited. And according to the law, we can only use it for tax administration and some law enforcement capabilities, not all kinds of different types of research. And so creating this synthetic data is very important, both from the privacy perspective, and one of our divisions has been collaborating and doing research on differential privacy, and is talking about using secure multi-party computing, potentially to be able to integrate data from different sources without actually sharing any private data. So that's pretty interesting. That's very interesting. A number of other initiatives in this, I feel like this IRA, I've been at IRS for about 10 years, and before that I was in private sector, and before that academia. What I've observed, it seems like we are at sort of an inflection point in terms of use of data and the attention to data. Even though for quite some time, as I mentioned, this research organization has helped do research projects, this ability to permeate that approach across the agency and utilize that type of analytics in decision making and process, it's like it's on supercharged after this process. And some of the things we've been doing in the research community to support some of these activities. One of the priorities of this standard operating plan is customer service, improving customer service. And we've been doing some analytics on, created some data products where we have both customer taxpayer contact information as well as longitudinal data about the taxpayer's account and in case situation. And we were working on utilizing that to identify, segment the taxpayer population, understand where the pain points are, and provide some recommendations or suggestions for service improvement. And with this initiative, this has already taken a very prominent role, and we are able to utilize the information in a real operational sense, which is very rewarding, because prior to that, you have the research result, you're showing it to people, people say it's great, but not a whole lot gets done beyond that. This has been it's one of the, I think, the first initiative in the standard operating plan is about taxpayer service. And other data products that we've had in the research community environment that's being utilized across supporting some of the other objectives in the areas of compliance are some graph analytic data products where we have a huge number of users that are utilizing that to understand fraud patterns, more than just a case-by-case type of analysis, and do that. So all of these things have taken kind of additional energy at the organization to be used in across the various operational functions, beyond the research capacity.
Reza, thank you. And as another,
let me add one more comment. Okay. Since Justin talked about the public website and what's available there, so we can't.
SOI data book. I was going to say public service announcements.
So we can't really publish a lot of IRS data.
Oh, right.
The Statistics of Income division does have an IRS.gov. If you go to that page, what can be published, and by law it's actually required. All of that data sets it's basically aggregated, anonymized. It's available for public consumption there.
Right, so on irs.gov we have the SOI data book, and also on data.gov When we get into the, when Treasury requests what data is public from the IRS, we don't have very many data sets that we can share. They generally are the SOI data sets. I think there are about 7, and they're not even exactly shared the way we have them. They're just kind of put out there with some basic information on data.gov.
You see, she's staring at me, right? she's telling me, she's thinking behind the shed.
It's 61. I'm sorry, Reza. You just want to. You can clarify. It's 6103. We're not allowed because it's 6103. We're not allowed to share most of our data.
Right, and the tax gap information that I mentioned too. A lot of this, there is quite a bit of information available if anybody's interested, but it's all anonymized.
Right, and when a lot of the analytics work we do at the aggregate level. We don't actually. We're not looking at your individual taxpayer record when we're doing analytics. Okay, so let's moving on to our last round, before audience questions. Lessons learned, key initiatives to share data-driven decisions. Okay, so here's the order: Roger, Justin, Reza, and then Melanie. Okay, Roger. And you're right, I'm looking at you. Okay, so let's make this relevant to newly minted CDOs. I'm going to take some liberty with this question. Please pardon me if this is too sensitive a subject. As your tenure at Treasury-wide CDO approaches the generally accepted length of time before those in the CDO role need to seek a new opportunity, what would you like to share concerning your journey? Wow. Oh, I'm sorry. You must know I actually work for Roger too. I'm on loan to Treasury, so that's why I have this comfort level. We'll figure out if I'm allowed.
I'm sweating. You can see that, right? So my 2 years are coming up in December. I'll be looking for something. So
you asked me to come to you. I'm sorry. This is planned. Okay, but go.
One of the things I would definitely say, it is great to have people to kind of push you, when I think about that question, 19 months into this role, right? So what do I, as a newly minted senior executive in CDO, have to offer about my journey? So when I joined, when I was selected for this role, my role wasn't really defined. So I would say maybe one of the first things to do is assess what the role is, make certain that you understand what it is that you're supposed to be delivering, right? And if you don't have that understanding, make certain that you define what that role is and work with your stakeholders to ensure that what you're going to be delivering from that role is something that benefits them. Because I think when you think about data, folks tend to think a lot about CDOs, especially in the government, as policy people, and governance. But I think we have a lot more to offer than that. So really kind of getting an understanding of what the role is and really defining it. The second thing I would say is to commit, to kind of dig in there. I feel like because this role is still fairly newish in federal government as CDO, we have to have a little bit of an entrepreneurial kind of mindset with it. You've got to go out and you've got to bang on doors. You've got to talk to stakeholders. You've got to find out what it is that they need, right? Find out what they care about, and then discern from that what it is that the organization needs. And I think sometimes there's a subtle little difference between what people care about and what they actually need, right? And there's a little bit of an art in trying to understanding how to deliver that. The next thing I would say is, pace yourself. Any organization, especially as a CDO, there are a ton of opportunities to improve data, to find data. I would tell you I work for the ASM, the Assistant Secretary. And I think one of the advantages I get there is I'm not uniquely wed to a CIO organization. So I get an opportunity, I think, to really work on behalf of our business stakeholders and really liaison with our IT and other parts of our department. Thinking about putting your hands around all of the data that you have and just understanding where it is and where it lives, that's success in and of itself, right? But there's so much more that you can do there. So pace yourself, right? Don't try to jump out and boil the ocean. Take a small bite of the pie and figure out how you can innovate in that role. And talking about innovating, I would say collaboration, right? I asked Dave a little while ago, whenever I met him coming in, was he a part of the Federal CDO Council? That's a great body to really kind of collaborate with your peers, with other CDOs, but also to partner with the industry. I can tell you, there's several of you in this room and others that I've had an opportunity to speak with over these past 18 months, and it's been really incredibly helpful to really understand what have they seen, what have you all seen, out in industry as you work with, CDOs and the federal government, and really, and what are you all doing in your spaces to innovate in the data world, and really kind of learning that and bringing it back and applying it to the work. The last thing I would say is, while I'm new to the CDO role, I'm new as a senior executive, one of the things I'm not necessarily new to is leadership. And so my last point that I would offer is just to lead, right? Take the sum of your experiences, your knowledge, your background, and also trust your gut and just lead, right? And don't allow anyone to deter you from that. Not everyone is going to agree with you. Not everyone's going to share your vision. Not everyone is going to be able to jump on with you and grab and ready to move in the right direction. But you've got to be committed and resolute to that, right? Understand, again, I talked earlier about what they care about versus what they need. Find that niche in there and move. And when folks try to get in your way, I'm telling you, this is, as a former Marine, this is how I do it. Lead me, follow me, or get the hell out of the way, right? So that's the way I operate.
Wow,
and
wow.
That is how I see my role continue to shape and to grow at Treasury. Thanks.
Wow, thank you. Okay, Justin, what is your approach to ensuring that Fiscal Service is leveraging data internally for decision making? And please give an example of a key initiative that you are pursuing to increase the use of data at the Bureau of the Fiscal Service.
Sure, thanks. I like that, Roger. Maybe we should, I should do that too. So the thing that we're trying to accomplish when we're using data internally is to increase the level of data-driven decision-making. And I have a little kind of model that I use. I mentioned I had a background in economics, so it kind of has tainted all of my thinking on any topic. But basically, the way that I think about this is that we have internal to our organization a supply of data and demand for data. And the intersection of those two curves are our own level of data-driven decision-making. And so my goal is to push the level of data-driven decision-making out. I have two curves that I can work on to do that, our supply of data and our demand for data. And the reason this is a helpful thing for me to think about is that when I think about the demand side of the equation, that is largely our workforce. And we have a large retraining effort that we've been doing. This year we launched something that we called Fiscal Data University, because any product that we develop has to have the word fiscal in it, or fiscal data. But we have a cohort of people who have come through who are interested in learning about data. They're either analysts who want to take their analysis skills to the next level, or people who don't have analytic skills that we want to learn how to make dashboards on their own. But part of the reason that I say this framing is helpful is that, we want to change their skills. We want them to have different skills, but really the thing that we want them to do is to be empowered and confident so that they are demanding data. That is like the thing that we're trying to do with the workforce. We want our workforce, to be asking questions, asking research questions that can be answered with data, and that helps to make data-driven decision-making happen. I, as the CDO, cannot be the generator of all of the use cases for the organization because I just don't understand all the business processes, and I'm a small team. I want everyone to be doing this as a part of the culture. And then on the supply side, the way that I think about this is not just like what data exists in our systems, but how hard is it to access that supply? And then we run into policy issues like, oh, you can't have that data, which we try to solve with other policy issues. No, you can have that data. But really what it comes down to is, in many cases, a technology issue. Like these guys were talking about at the IRS, we also have very old systems at the Fiscal Service, which are in some cases on a mainframe. They're not designed to get data off of them. So you could ask a very interesting research question, like how have the demographics of people buying savings bonds changed as inflation has gone up? How have the changes that we've made to the website impacted the experience of people? It's very hard to answer those questions when we can't access the data in this system. So the other thing that I've been trying to do is to just start to build the enterprise data platform, which I think is going to be obvious to all of you, so that we can have a place to put the data and have the hooks to go get the data. But that project in and of itself has been hard, although we are expecting to have a production system ready in October. So those are the two things we've been focused on.
Wow, wow. That's actually, when I hear you talking supply, I realize your economic background is really helping drive your CDO role. And okay, next, Reza. How are you ensuring increased data usage for decision making? Specifically, how does the IRS get to truly data-driven decision making?
Very interesting question. So the focus of this Research Applied Analytics and Statistics organization that I'm supporting, has been, I would say, this is Reza's opinion, might not be 100% accurate, has been focused on externally on tax administration, basically on the taxpayers, on compliance, on reducing taxes, not so much on internal operations, like building dashboard to see how much of this is happening or how much of that is happening internally in operation. Even though we can't share the results of those analytics, but they are really focused internally on the overall tax administration primarily. One of the things that we are focused in is building, expanding capability. I think also partly as the function of Melanie's role as the CDAO, like building data products to enable better insights into our operations and utilization of that information in decision making. I already mentioned in terms of the tax administration, a lot of the analytics capabilities that has been built in the environment is already being used and to inform decisions about tax administration. For example, understanding risks related to different, so that $500 billion of gap, how do you address that? Like where the gaps are, what are the risks are, and how do you look at that? And the taxpayer service, as I mentioned, where are the pain points? If customers are calling and they're not getting through or they're not getting the answers they need, taxpayers, where are the issues, and identifying solutions for those. We built data products that are available to the business units, and we are enabling them to be able to utilize that as part of their operations.
Hi.
Yeah, thanks.
Melanie, Reza, thank you. Melanie, here's the question. Your question or audience questions, and then maybe your last question. How do you want to deal with this?
I really want to share.
You wanted that last
a little
question.
bit more. Yeah, I
Okay,
really do.
okay, fine. So, Melanie, in your role as Chief Data and Analytics Officer, what data challenges do you plan to conquer over the next 3 years at the service?
So there's really three things that I want to highlight. So first, I'm working toward making data a key consideration at the outset of the things that we do. And so a good example relates to tax law changes. So tax law changes often happen very late in the year. Sometimes filing season has already began and the changes are retroactive. And so the number one priority is getting things in place so that taxpayers can file their taxes. And so the challenge there for us is that the sort of downstream needs for data are not part of that planning. And so, we're working on, again, prioritizing filing, which is important, but then what is it that the public and decision makers will want to know about uptake of the new credit? And to what extent is the way that we've, initially implemented the policy change going to allow us to easily report on that? I mean, very basic questions about uptake. A little bit more downstream, what is it that we need from a compliance standpoint? What are the risks associated with this change? And then to what extent are we capturing the information that we need to support compliance activities? And so that is not something that we can correct on our own. Reza has been a real champion in establishing a cadre of experts throughout the organization that are our extensions, who are thinking about data on day number one as we're implementing new programs. And so that's the first of three that I really want to conquer or move on in the next 3 years. The second is, and this is something that Reza touched on, is making it easier to get to the information that you need to inform a decision, to answer a question. And so at IRS, it's interesting. We have a lot of good information available, and then it's like the agency skipped a step because they do really advanced analytics. and what we don't actually have are, thoughtfully curated data sets and products where you can go to a landing page and get to the basic types of things that all leaders in the organization will need to be able to access. So in contrast, VA does this really well. So VA has VSSC, which I think is a Veteran Support Services Center, but that might actually not be what VSSC stands for. And it's nice. I mean, depending on your permissions, you can get to dashboard on the status of your facilities. So to Reza's point about, what facilities are open, how many patients did they see yesterday? What are the outcomes, morbidity, mortality reports? What are the infection rates? And then layering on top of that basic information flags so that people at the headquarters level get sort of early indications that something is really strange is happening here. We need to look into this further. And so those are the pieces that we're really missing at the IRS, because we've got the information, we've got the really jazzy stuff, and some of the basics are missing. So that is a top priority for me right now. So, and then the last thing is a hard one for us, given IRS's history and recent history, is that we have to find the right way to balance zero trust principles with needing to democratize access to data that people need to complete their jobs. And so that is really hard. And this is an area where IRS has zero margin for error. And so that is something that is sort of our new top priority. Absolutely.
Okay, excellent. Okay, we're open for audience questions, but I don't know when we're going to get shut down.
Hey, thank you for telling your stories, everyone. I appreciate it. My name is Chris. I'm the Chief Data Officer for the Food and Nutrition Service under the USDA. And my question to all of you is about trust. I think what's going to make or break my team and what we're trying to build is not just establishing trust with our program and operational partners, but maintaining that. I think in our organization, we have a lot of data guardians or data gatekeepers, and not just in the organization, but our states that administer the programs as well. So how do you all approach these folks or these organizations within your agencies to establish that trust, to get to the data, to build these tools and all of that? So, thanks.
Justin, do you want to start?
Sure. I would just say there's really no shortcut to it. It's just and you're right, it's important. I feel like as a CDO, your most important relationships have to be with your CISO, your CIO, your CFO, and the only way to do it is the hard way, by producing products, by listening to what they need, by delivering things that they want, and I would just say it takes time and patience.
So I would say something similar, and Roger, what you said earlier resonated with me. So as somebody who's new to tax administration, my first priority was understanding the business and then making them partners and making them the ones that are trumpeting our work. So for me, there's no benefit to trying to be a tall poppy. I mean, it is really about helping them to do what they need to do and sort of putting them front and center of the work. And so we have so many meetings, and meetings as pre-meetings for the meeting. But it's really essential to ensure that we're in radical agreement about what we're pursuing. Sometimes, Reza mentioned the CX analytics activities. Sometimes it can be hard because, we make really good progress and everybody's really excited about the results, but there just isn't bandwidth to actually take those insights, what the top, taxpayer pain points are, and actually do something about it because everybody is just, stretched. And so I think just being ready and continuing to revisit so that we can then move from a really nice product to something that actually moves the needle in an area that we care about. So I agree, Justin, with your comment. There's no shortcut, but I think just continuing to be a good partner is definitely the most important, key to success. I don't know, Reza, if you have.
I'll add 3 words: show tangible results.
We have time for one more question.
Thank you. Hi, Robin.
Hi, Justin.
My name is Justin Magruder. I'm the CDO at Science Applications International Corp. I've only been in the government services and contracting space for 3 years. I spent about 28 years in financial services. And my question goes to some things we've been talking about. But I'm going to start with the background that I have about 20 or 30 questions for each of you. You guys hit a lot of topics I care about. We're primarily a defense contractor, so we don't, this is not self-serving. But as I go through the thread of legislation, starting with Patriot Act, where I really got involved in 2001, Dodd-Frank, FATCA, Evidence Act, Data Act, and most recently, a number of things, IRA in particular. How do you interpret the way that the legislation instructs you to implement new law or regulation? And do you feel, and this is something we've talked about, that there is funding for the new CDO structures? What I see, and one of our data scientists is here in the back, we've been studying USA spending. Justin, we think it's really cool. There's a lot there. Do you see funding shifting from technology to data? Because we have a saying that IT is all about data. So I'll try and keep it short.
I wonder, Reza, if it doesn't make sense to shift to you. I mean, the tangible results is a key piece of this. Do you want to start?
I think it's important to distinguish data initiatives from pure systems and IT initiatives. And the data initiatives drive, the infrastructure needs and implementations. I do think, I think that you pointed an important issue. There's no designated appropriations. So that does make it difficult at times to tackle some of these issues. And I don't know if there's an easy solution, but I agree with you that that's the right approach.
Just really quickly, just to kind of hit on a couple things you mentioned. I would definitely say that one of the benefits of the Evidence Act is that it's really given or provided an opportunity for CDOs to come to the table. I think you heard Justin mention earlier, kind of building that relationship with your CISOs, CIOs, and other stakeholders. In terms of like funding for those CDO positions, I've got to be honest, my experience so far has been that there's not a ton of funding for those that's available, right? And so you've got to really go out and just articulate your value, figure out, what folks need. And I was trying to reference this, I think, a little bit earlier, and that is you have to show up with something other than policy and governance, right? My former boss used to tell me, it's like, look, if you're going to really grow and really kind of, advance your position here, you've got to learn how to make an operational impact. Get folks to trust you, get them understanding that you can deliver, and then they'd be willing to invest in you and bring in more data positions and things like that on and other bit of support. So.
Thank you, Robin and the panelists. A great round of applause for our panelists. Thanks everyone for joining.
I have another answer for you.